New Year's Eve was supposed to be a joyous occasion, a celebration with friends to welcome the new year. But fate had other plans for me. Lost on backcountry roads and running low on fuel, I had no choice but to pull into a gas station at a remote crossroads. The gas station, Crossroads Gas, was an eerie sight. Dimly lit under the moonlit sky, it looked abandoned, but the lights were on and the pumps seemed operational. The sign above flickered intermittently, barely illuminating the snow-covered ground. As I filled up my tank, the front door of the station creaked open. A figure emerged, cloaked in shadows. The attendant, or so I assumed, was an old man with a gaunt face and hollow eyes. He watched me silently, sending chills down my spine. "Be careful on these roads tonight," the attendant croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Strange things happen at the crossroads on New Year's Eve." His warning hung in the air, thick with ominous undertones. Uneasy, I quickly finished refueling and paid. As I got back into my car, I noticed the clock. It was close to midnight. The roads were still empty as I drove away, the attendant's warning echoing in my mind. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, the gas station lights flickered out, plunging the crossroads into darkness. When I looked again, the station had vanished, as if it had never been there. Confused, I continued driving, but something was off. The familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by unfamiliar terrain. My GPS was malfunctioning, showing me driving in a void. The car radio crackled to life on its own, playing a strange, haunting melody that I'd never heard before. The music was hypnotic, almost otherworldly. As the clock struck midnight, a dense fog enveloped my car. I could barely see beyond the hood. Then I heard it. A countdown, not from the radio, but from somewhere outside, in the fog. With each number, shadowy figures appeared in the fog. People, or what used to be people. Their faces twisted in silent screams, their hands reaching out to me. In a panic, I tried to turn the car around, but it was as if the fog had trapped me. No matter which way I drove, the apparitions followed, the countdown repeating endlessly. I realized then that I was no longer in my world. The Crossroads Gas, the old attendant, the countdown, it was a ritual, and I was the unwitting participant. As the final count reached 0, a blinding light pierced the fog. Time seemed to stand still, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The sun was rising on a new year. The fog cleared, revealing familiar surroundings. I was back on the road I knew, a few miles from home. The night's events felt like a distant dream. I never found Crossroads Gas again, nor did I hear that haunting melody. The experience left me with unanswerable questions. Was it a warning, a test, or something more sinister? New Year's Eve has never been the same for me since that night. I no longer see it as a time of celebration, but as a reminder of the mysterious, unexplained encounter at Crossroads Gas. It was Halloween night, and I was driving through the countryside to visit friends for a costume party. The roads were quiet, the moon casting long shadows across the fields. A wrong turn led me to a lonely road, with only the occasional flicker of jack-o'-lanterns marking the way. As my fuel gauge dipped worryingly low, I spotted a gas station ahead. Its sign, Hollow's Pump, was adorned with Halloween decorations, making it look more like a haunted attraction than a place of business. A sense of unease washed over me as I pulled up. The gas station was oddly quiet. I got out to fuel my car and noticed a figure standing by the station's entrance, dressed in what looked like an old gas attendant uniform, complete with a vintage cap. But something was off. He was unnaturally still, almost like a statue. As I started pumping gas, the lights began to flicker, casting eerie, dancing shadows across the station. The air grew colder, and a faint, unsettling laughter echoed in the distance. When I looked back at the attendant, he was gone. In his place was an old, rusted pump, looking like it hadn't been used in years. Confused, I quickly finished refueling. A sudden gust of wind brought whispers that seemed to swirl around me. The words were indistinct, but they carried a warning, urging me to leave. As I got back into my car, I saw in the rearview mirror a procession of ghostly figures emerging from the station, their eyes hollow, their movements jerky and unnatural, as if they were marionettes being pulled by unseen strings. I didn't wait to see more. Slamming the car into gear, I sped away from Hollow's pump. In my mirror, the ghostly figures faded into the night, and the station disappeared as if swallowed by the darkness. At the party, I recounted my experience, but no one had ever heard of Hollow's pump. Determined to prove it wasn't just my imagination, I returned to the road the next day in daylight. There was no sign of the gas station, only an overgrown field. Intrigued, I visited the local library and found an old newspaper article about a gas station attendant who had mysteriously disappeared on Halloween night decades ago. The station was Hollow's pump, which had been demolished years later. Every Halloween since, I've felt a pull towards that lonely road, a curiosity mixed with dread. I've never gone back, but the memory of that night remains clear. Halloween now brings an added chill, a reminder of the night when the veil between the living and the dead seemed perilously thin at Hollow's pump. The laughter in the wind, the ghostly procession, and the vanishing gas station haunt my dreams. I'm left with questions that have no answers. Was it a Halloween prank, a trick of the light, or something more? The mystery of Hollow's pump lingers, a ghost story that feels all too real. The road was a lonely stretch of asphalt cutting through a forgotten part of the countryside. I was on my way back from a business trip, the night gnawing at the edges of my headlights. That's when my fuel light flickered on, urging me to find the nearest gas station. It appeared suddenly, a relic from another time. The sign read, "Last Stop Gas," flickering with a sputtering neon glow. The station was deserted, pumps like ancient monoliths under the flickering lights. A chill ran down my spine as I pulled up. The air was heavy with the scent of old gasoline and wet earth. I called out, but only silence answered. Reluctantly, I began to refuel. That's when I noticed the small, dingy window of the service station. There was someone, or something, watching. As the pump churned, a soft knocking started from the service station's door. It grew more insistent, desperate. I was torn between fear and the compulsion to help. I approached the door, every instinct screaming to leave. The knocking ceased abruptly as I reached for the handle. The door creaked open to an empty room, dust dancing in the beam of my flashlight. A whisper brushed against my ear, cold and damp. "Leave!" it hissed, a voice from the shadows. I turned to run, but my car, my escape, was gone. Panic set in. The station seemed to change before my eyes, walls decaying, lights flickering out. The once solid ground turned to the marsh, gripping my feet. A figure materialized in the dim light, a spectral attendant, eyes hollow and deep. He pointed to a path leading into the darkness, his mouth a silent warning. With no other choice, I followed the path. The night closed in around me, the sounds of the unseen haunting my every step. Time lost meaning, each step as eternal as the last. The path led me in a circle back to the decaying gas station. The ghostly attendant waited, his expression one of sorrow. "You cannot leave," he whispered. "The last stop keeps what it claims." Days turned to nights, a never-ending loop. I became part of the gas station, a guardian of a cursed place. Each night, I watched travelers pull in, their faces mirrors of my past terror. One night, a car stopped. A familiar face stepped out. Mine, from another life, another time. I realized then that the last stop was a snare, trapping souls in a cycle of fear and despair. I approached my other self, whispering the warning I'd heard long ago. "Leave, before it's too late." My words broke the cycle, the station flickering out of existence, releasing me. I found myself back on the road, the sun rising, dispelling the night. The gas station was gone, as if it had never been. Though years have passed, the memory of the last stop lingers. I still hear the whispers on lonely roads, a cautionary tale of a place that preys on the weary, the lost, the forgotten. Driving through the backroads late at night was not part of my plan. I was returning from a weekend trip and my GPS rerouted me due to a road closure. The new route was desolate and unfamiliar. The fuel gauge was worryingly low when I spotted a gas station, seemingly appearing out of nowhere. It was an old station, its sign barely legible under the flickering lights. Midnight Fuel, it read. An unsettling feeling washed over me as I pulled in. The station was eerily quiet, no attendant in sight, and the other cars parked there seemed abandoned, covered in a thick layer of dust. I stepped out, the silence pressing heavily against my ears. The air was stagnant, carrying a faint, unpleasant odor. The pumps looked ancient but functional. I inserted my card and began fueling. Glancing around, I noticed my car's reflection in the station's window, but something was off. In the reflection, my car was missing. I turned around in panic, but it was still there. Confused, I focused back on refueling. A soft whispering started to fill the air, growing louder, like voices carried by the wind. The words were indistinct, but they carried a tone of warning, of urgent dread. Looking around, I realized the whispers seemed to emanate from the other cars. Peering into one, I saw a figure, its face contorted in terror, slamming against the window before vanishing into thin air. Horrified, I yanked the fuel nozzle from my car and sprinted to the station's service window. Inside, the room was filled with old newspaper clippings, each detailing mysterious disappearances at this very location. Behind the service counter, a dirty, cracked mirror hung on the wall. In its reflection, I saw a figure standing right behind me. Whirling around, there was nothing. When I looked back at the mirror, my own reflection was gone. A voice, deep and distorted, broke the silence. "You cannot leave," it said. I spun around to see the station attendant, his eyes hollow, skin pale and translucent. He spoke of a curse that bound him to the station, a punishment for a sin long forgotten. Each car in the lot was a trapped soul, lured in and unable to leave, just like he was. Realizing I might be next, I dashed to my car. As I started the engine, the station began to distort, the ground shaking violently. Driving away, I watched in the rearview mirror as the station faded into a mist, disappearing as if it never existed. The whispers, however, remained, a haunting chorus in the winds. I reported my experience to the local authorities, but they found no trace of any gas station. The coordinates led to an empty field. My story was dismissed as fatigue-induced hallucinations. Since that night, every road trip fills me with an inexplicable dread. I avoid back roads, especially at night, but sometimes in the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of the midnight fuel sign, a reminder of the night I nearly lost myself. I still hear the whispers at times, especially when the fuel gauge starts to dip low. They serve as a chilling reminder that some places are better left undiscovered, some mysteries better left unsolved. I was driving home late one night, my eyes heavy from a long day's work. The highway was deserted, stretching endlessly before me. The only sign of civilization was a lone gas station, its flickering neon sign beckoning travelers. My car's fuel light flickered on, leaving me no choice but to stop. The gas station was old and run down, a relic from a bygone era. As I pulled up to the pump, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. There was no attendant in sight, which wasn't unusual for late-night stops. I got out to fill up my tank, the sound of fuel flowing the only noise in the still night air. As the pump clicked off, I heard the crunch of gravel. Another car pulled up rapidly, parking haphazardly next to the station's entrance. A man emerged, his movements erratic and frantic. His eyes were wild, and a disturbing smile twisted his lips. He approached me, ranting about being followed, about voices telling him what to do. I tried to keep calm, suggesting he should rest or call for help. But my words seemed to agitate him more. The man suddenly produced a knife, waving it in the air. "They told me you'd be here," he shouted. "They told me you need to be stopped." Panic surged through me as I realized I was in grave danger. I dashed to my car, locking the doors just as he lunged at it. His knife scraped against the glass as I started the engine. I sped off, leaving him behind, his maniacal laughter echoing in the night. Once I was a safe distance away, I called the police. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. I described the man and the location, urging them to hurry. The police found the gas station deserted. There was no sign of the man or his car. The only evidence of the encounter was the faint markings from his knife on my car's window. The incident left me with more questions than answers. Who was he? What voices was he talking about? The police said they'd keep an eye on the area, but they never found any trace of the maniac. Since that night, I've avoided that stretch of highway. The image of the maniac, his wild eyes and crazed laughter haunt my dreams. Sometimes, when I stop at other gas stations on quiet nights, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him emerging from the shadows. I often wonder if I could have done something to help him, to reach out to the person behind the madness. But then I remember the knife, the threat, and the fear. I've never heard about any other incidents at that gas station, no other encounters with the maniac. It's as if he vanished into thin air, a ghost of the highway. The open road no longer feels like freedom. It feels like a journey through unknown dangers. And at every turn, I can't help but fear that the gas station maniac is still out there, waiting.